early years of our marriage, life felt predictable but comforting. Melissa and I met through mutual friends and shared a desire for a simple life. Meals together, relaxed weekends, and a future built on love and stability. We faced challenges, but nothing seemed too difficult. Our kids brought purpose to our daily routines, and I believed our shared history would carry us through any tough times. However, as time passed, cracks began to appear. We grew too comfortable, conversations shifted from dreams to logistics, and our time together became routine. I ignored the subtle signs, Melissa's distant looks and changed tone, thinking it was normal. After 2 decades, I believed our bond was strong enough to handle any changes. But I was about to learn that even deep love can fade if neglected. One evening, I greeted Melissa in the kitchen, but she didn't respond. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to her quiet moments, so I wasn't alarmed. After washing up, she joined me in the bedroom and asked how my day was. I proudly told her about my promotion, but her lack of enthusiasm worried me. When I asked about her day, she dropped a bombshell. "Mark, I want a divorce." I was stunned and confused. I couldn't understand where this was coming from. When I asked why, she hesitated, then confessed I met someone else. "We need to be together." Her words hit me hard. As a skilled salesman, I was used to handling surprises. But this was different, much more personal. "You met someone and what you want." "A fling," I blurted out. Still reeling, I looked at Melissa, trying to make sense of it all. Her words didn't register. "It's not like that. It just happened by chance," she explained hesitantly. My mind fixated on her words, but I stayed silent, still in shock, like I was suspended in midair waiting to crash down. "Stop looking at me like that." She said I must have looked lost, like a fish out of water. "Mark, I love him." "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen," she said before leaving the bathroom. I was overwhelmed with emotions, but all I could think about was why there was no logic, no explanation for why our marriage was over. I should have been angry, but I was stuck on understanding how this happened. I went downstairs intending to talk to her, but she wasn't in the kitchen and nothing was out of place. Melissa always prided herself on being a great mother and housewife, never wanting to work outside the home. I searched the house, checked the garage, and even looked outside. But she was nowhere to be found, maybe. She's out for a walk clearing her head, I thought. But as I waited, anger began to build. She had probably fallen for someone who filled her head with fantasies. I grabbed a beer and sat in the den, waiting for her return. When I woke up, it was evening, and the house was still empty. I called out for her with no response. The house felt lonely, and I wasn't enjoying the silence that had hit me. She had already left. I frantically searched for my phone, called her number, and heard it ring in our bedroom. Her phone rings, credit cards, checkbook, and a sealed envelope were all left behind. It felt like her entire life had been reduced to nothing. Standing there, I realized how little it all meant. Now I didn't want to be in that room, so I left drained and overwhelmed. I tried to sleep, but the next morning I dragged myself to work. Even though I felt numb, I managed to get through the day without drawing attention to myself. But Melissa's words echoed in my mind. The rest of the week was a blur of emotions. The thought of spending the weekend alone with my memories was unbearable. So I just got in the car and drove, not caring where I ended up. As I drove, I asked myself if I still wanted to stay married to Melissa. I wasn't sure I wanted to be with the Melissa I married 22 years ago, not the one who had just admitted to cheating. It felt like it happened ages ago. even though it was only a few days. The painful reality was that she didn't want me anymore, and no matter how much I hoped, I knew she had made her vision. I found myself on a quiet road leading to a secluded lake spot that Melissa and I had discovered while searching for retirement property. We never bought land there, but we loved the place and visited it often. The lake's serene beauty, with the sun setting over the water, once brought us peace, but now I hated it. I didn't want peace. I wanted to rage. Still, I got out of the car and sat by the lake, lost in thought. As dusk fell, the memories of joy and love overwhelmed me, and I knew I had to leave. Walking back to the car, my emotions finally caught up with me. I couldn't hold them back any longer. I fell to my knees, fists pounding the ground, screaming and cursing everything, including Melissa. When the rage subsided, I was left with the deep pain of betrayal and rejection. As night fell, I found solace in the darkness. Alone with my grief, I cried harder than I ever had, even more than when I lost my sister. Back then, Melissa had been there to comfort me. Now I had no one to lean on as I mourned of our marriage. Reflecting on our relationship, I realized how much I loved her, not just for the big moments, but for the little things I told her. I loved her in unexpected ways and always appreciated her efforts. We had our disagreements, but they never overshadowed our love until now. I was blindsided by her infidelity, and though I could blame work, I knew I'd missed the signs. I wondered if I was partly to blame. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. As the sun rose, my emotions finally settled. I knew the coming days and weeks would be tough, but I was ready to move forward. My hands were bruised and swollen, but I was determined to start putting things in order, although I couldn't contact a lawyer. On a Saturday, I checked our finances, expecting the worst. To my surprise, Melissa hadn't touched the money. It didn't match the stories I'd heard about cheating, and it gave me a small glimmer of hope. If she hadn't touched the money, maybe this was all a joke or just a one-time fling, and she'd eventually come back. But I could quickly dismiss that hope, recalling the look on her face when she left. She wasn't coming back. I was left wondering why maybe she trusted me not to take advantage of her and was just waiting for the legal process to play out. The thought of divorce still hurt, but I had no choice but to accept it. I remembered the manila envelope she left behind, though I dreaded going into the bedroom. I needed to see what was inside. Feeling like an intruder, I grabbed the envelope and quickly left back in the kitchen with a beard. I stared at the envelope, curious but not ready to open it. Instead, I checked her phone. There was nothing on it except my number from when I called her on Monday night. Melissa had erased everything. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When she got her phone, she insisted on a separate account. The bills went directly to her, and I found no trace of them around the house. Her clothes were still in the closets, along with our kids' photo albums. I couldn't understand why she left behind things she would need to identify herself. After thinking it over, I set aside the mystery and opened the envelope. It had my full name on it opening. It felt like the final chapter of our life together. Inside were several papers: a petition for divorce, life insurance policies, our marriage certificate, the kids' birth certificates, and the deed to the house. There was also a smaller envelope with my name written in Melissa's familiar handwriting. I held it, dreading what it represented, but needing to know it. Took 2 tries to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered front and back with her writing. I took a long drink from my beer before reading her letter. Dear Mark, I'm not sure when you'll find this letter, but by now you know I've left you for someone else. This wasn't something I planned, and I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. You always trusted me, never suspecting I was capable of this. And I've struggled with guilt. You've been a wonderful husband and father, and I know this hurts. But I don't want to go into details that would make it worse. I met this person by accident, and our connection grew beyond that friendship. This isn't a reflection on you. You've been everything a woman could want, but I couldn't fight my feelings anymore, and neither could they. They are also married and have left their spouse and kids to be with me. If it's any comfort, we haven't had ZX and won't until we're both divorced. We didn't want to add more pain by complicating things further. I left everything behind because I'm starting a new life, and dragging out the divorce in court wouldn't help. I'm not asking for anything. You've worked hard for what you have. I hope by the time you read this, I've already spoken to our children. They didn't know anything, so please don't blame them. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I hope our kids can forgive me. I would like to stay in touch with them, but it's up to them. Leaving you wasn't easy. I'm throwing away 22 wonderful years with a loving man, and I feel the weight of my betrayal deeply. There were times I thought of telling you, hoping you could stop me. But it's too late now. Our feelings have taken over, and I can't change that. I wish you a long and happy life, however you may find it. Please don't try to come after me. We'll be overseas until the divorces are final. I've left a card with an attorney's name, Jack Belgium. He has power of attorney to handle everything. All you need to do is sign the papers. I hope you don't fight this. It will only prolong the pain. I'll return after the divorce, but we won't see each other again. I haven't mentioned who I'm with. To avoid causing more trouble, if we ever meet again, I hope it's as friends. But I leave that up to you. I still love you, Mark, and always will, Melissa. As I read the last parts of Melissa's letter, my eyes filled with tears, and I couldn't stop them. I had promised myself not to cry anymore. But her words reopened the pain and anger I thought I had. Calmed. I was too tired and shocked to feel anything but deep emptiness. I put everything back in the envelope and left it on the table, unsure of my next steps. I knew I needed legal advice, and it was a relief to know someone else could help carry this burden. Though Melissa avoided giving too many details, I was skilled at reading between the lines. I knew I'd reread her letter many times, searching for what she hadn't said. Over that dreary weekend time dragged on. Despite her claim that she hadn't slept with her lover, I found comfort in getting rid of certain things in the house. I moved the bedroom furniture to the garage and boxed up her clothes. Even though it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, I could still smell her on every piece. But I pushed through, knowing it was better to deal with one big hurt than let it eat at me little by little. The rest of the month followed the same pattern, except my attorney seemed pleased with the settlement, or lack of one. I was glad someone could find joy in this mess. My curiosity about the man Melissa left with grew determined. He was wealthy, given that she didn't take anything with her expecting to buy new things with his money. He was also well-connected, likely helping them stay incognito overseas. She'd left her driver's license behind, planning to disappear. Melissa had covered her tracks too well for it to be a solo effort. I suspected she had professional help, but my neighbors didn't notice anyone unusual at the house. However, they did see her leave around IAM each day. The man had also left behind a wife and young children. That, combined with his wealth, gave me a starting point for my search. The rich are easier to track. I spoke with my attorney several times over the next few weeks, and he urged me to sign the divorce papers, fearing Melissa might return and make things worse. I shared that fear, but wasn't ready to sign yet. In our no-fault divorce state, everything earned during the marriage was considered communal property. Since Melissa had stayed home, I could end up paying significant alimony and losing half of everything, despite the risks. I needed to learn more about her affair before signing using resources at work. I identified several wealthy men in the state who fit the profile. I narrowed it down to a few possibilities. Men in their late 30s or 40s, with wives likely between 30 and 40 years old. It was a long shot, but it made sense. Now I faced the hard task of finding which wife on my list was missing a husband, then contacting her to explain why I needed to know. I'm not sure why I felt the need to contact this other man's wife or soon-to-be ex-wife. It just seemed like the right thing to do. It sounds simple, but after more digging, I found that most of the men on my list traveled frequently for business, often spending days or weeks abroad. Which of those husbands hadn't come back? If Melissa's lover had returned home and then quickly left, it would be almost impossible to identify him. In my mind, I couldn't believe that two adults, supposedly in love and free of their spouses, could keep things platonic during a long trip, even with the best intentions. Something would eventually happen. A look, a touch that would ignite their desire. It was just a matter of time, and they had plenty of it. It took me several more days to narrow the list down to 3 possible men. Meanwhile, I repainted and recarpeted the master bedroom and bought new furniture. I hadn't moved my stuff back in yet, since I was still looking for a few more things to make the room feel like mine again. It's strange how things change when I thought my marriage was solid. The bedroom was just a place to sleep and occasionally make love. But after Melissa left, it felt heavy with gloom, even though I knew it was just my imagination. It affected me deeply, leading to the extreme makeover. I had spoken to my kids a few times since their mom left, and it seemed she had told them even less than what she wrote in her letter to me. They asked me all sorts of questions, some embarrassing, that I couldn't answer. I think they believed I knew more than I was saying, and I could sense they might have blamed me for their mom leaving. They didn't say anything harsh, but I felt the unspoken accusation every time we talked. I was relieved that both my daughters lived out of state. One had just gotten married, and although I didn't like her husband much, he treated her well enough. The other was in college and would be graduating next year if they'd been closer. They would have been constantly on my case about the split, and I couldn't handle that. I was struggling enough. As it was at work, I was getting back to a more stable emotional state. Only my boss, Herbert McNair, mentioned my earlier erratic behavior. While he expressed concern for my well-being, I knew his main worry was whether I could still bring in clients and money. I assured him I could, and that was the end of it. However, I noticed some of my coworkers giving me curious looks. I'd never been distant with them, and we'd shared drinks after work a few times, but I kept my personal life private. I knew there were probably rumors flying around the office, but whatever they were, they didn't reach me. Some coworkers asked how I was doing since Melissa left, but I never discussed my marital issues. A few women at the office seemed more interested in me, but that might have been my imagination. I wasn't actively looking. But a few weeks after Melissa left, I started noticing women more. I've never been much of a socialite, so I wasn't good at picking up on signals. When a woman was interested, if someone smiled at me or gave me a certain look, I usually made a quick exit, unsure if she was just being friendly or wanted more. As long as I had Melissa, I never needed experience with other women. I also began exercising more. During my marriage, I'd been slightly concerned about gaining weight. Not too much, but enough to justify 20 minutes of exercise each morning. I started running and doing a more complete workout, spending an hour each day at it. It helped me burn off anger. I also decided to improve my cooking. The internet is full of recipes, some of which are healthy and tasty. So my diet and cooking skills both improved. My weekday evenings became predictable. Cooking, cleaning, fixing things around the house, researching my project, bathing, and then sleeping aside from the occasional call from family or friends. I settled into a life free of unpleasant surprises. I guess I needed the routine to keep myself from unraveling. Weekends were harder at first because I had so much free time, remembering my mother's saying, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop." I tackled house repairs, starting with the master bedroom. I wasn't much of a handyman and usually had Melissa call someone, but I figured I could learn. My first attempts were disasters, but I eventually got the hang of it, and it turned out to be good therapy. This change didn't happen overnight, but it did happen gradually. Instead of drinking myself to sleep, I worked on my project to uncover the identity of Melissa's lover. Oddly enough, it eased my pain a bit. By the 4th month, I had settled into my routine when I realized something surprising. I hated my job. Sales requires more than just a drive to succeed. It needs deep motivation to keep going year after year. My main motivation was gone, but I had enough saved to retire, though I wouldn't live as comfortably. Like many others, I had dreams and ambitions that were sidelined by life's demands. I thought about writing a novel or inventing something groundbreaking, but I quickly dismissed those ideas. Instead, I considered starting a small business selling useful items, though I wasn't sure what. Yet my attorney kept pressing me to sign the divorce papers, but I ignored him. I knew he was looking out for my best interests, but I was too focused on finding out who Melissa had run off with. My daughters were less forgiving of my inaction. They didn't want their parents to divorce, but they realized things weren't as hopeful as they initially thought. They gave me a hard time, more out of their own pain than anything I'd done during all this. I hadn't heard a word from Melissa, nor had our children. I assumed her attorney was keeping her informed. My lawyer tried to track her down, but her attorney, Jack Belgium, was tight-lipped, which only strengthened my resolve. My attorney had one last-ditch option up his sleeve, filing an alienation of affection claim. But it was a risky move dependent on the judge's discretion. We'd only use it if necessary, meaning we'd be fighting the divorce, something that both pleased and frustrated my attorney. He'd earn more money, but was annoyed because if I signed the papers, I'd keep everything from the marriage and he'd have a victory on his record by the 6th month. I was certain I despised my job and seriously considered doing something else. I stuck with it because it paid well, and I might need the money for future legal battles. With that in mind, I started day trading, setting aside only what I could afford to lose. It didn't go well at first. I lost more than I made. But after a few weeks, I adjusted and began making small profits. I wasn't going to get rich, but I made enough to reinvest. I've never been a risk taker. But when Melissa left, many of the reasons I'd been so cautious in life left with her in the past 6 months. I started taking karate classes at a friend's suggestion after my wife left. The training brought balance to my life, both physically and mentally, so much that I began attending 6 days a week. I wasn't aiming for a black belt. I just enjoyed the discipline and self-defense. I adjusted my routine to go to the gym in the mornings and karate at night. getting into the best shape of my life. If I couldn't sleep, I'd practice my moves for 15 or 20 minutes, which always calmed me down. I also rekindled my interest in weapons. I had learned to shoot as a paratrooper in the Army, but after marrying Melissa and having kids, I got rid of my weapons. However, I still enjoyed target shooting and would rent a weapon when I wanted to practice. Now, with no one to object, I bought a firearm and got a concealed carry permit, though this decision came after something unsettling happened. About 2 weeks after Melissa left, I started noticing things out of place. At home, I had been keeping everything orderly, so when I saw my keys on the rack in the wrong order, it caught my attention. I dismissed it at first, but then I noticed other small changes, like a book on my nightstand being moved and a bookmark that my DAW made not sticking out as usual. These little things made me feel like someone had been in my house searching for something. Although I wasn't sure, the thought unnerved me enough to change the locks and install a top-of-the-line alarm system and cameras. I also started going to the shooting range again and took NRA home protection courses. I knew I was getting a bit paranoid, but living alone after so many years with Melissa was disorienting. My mind was a mess and nothing made sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Or maybe just deluding myself because of my lingering feelings for my wife. But then I questioned whether I still loved her at all. Love fades if it isn't nurtured. And I knew I'd have to confront that if I ever saw Melissa again. But I also wondered why I didn't just accept the divorce and move on, especially since the terms were in my favor. Maybe it was my ego. Refusing to let go those thoughts didn't comfort me, so I pushed them aside. I wasn't entirely alone, though. Once word got around the office about my separation, I caught the interest of several female co-workers. As I got into better shape, that interest grew. I went on a few dates, but nothing worked out. I was too preoccupied with finding Melissa and wasn't ready for a serious relationship. The women quickly realized this, and after one date they usually saw that I needed closure before I could move on. My search for Melissa had reached a dead end. Though I had 3 possible suspects, none fully matched the criteria, so I changed tactics and tried to figure out where Melissa might have met her lover. Using a map, phone book, and the internet, I identified every mall, coffee shop, and public place within a 30-minute drive from my house. The sheer number of options was overwhelming, and for a moment my resolve wavered. But then I thought, what else is there to do? I'm no investigator, but it made sense to just start asking around. Armed with the latest photo of Melissa and printouts of 3 suspects, I began my search. Starting with the closest locations each day during lunch, I spent 1 to 2 hours visiting places following pre-printed directions. To maximize my time, I managed to visit 3 spots daily, but avoided weekends since Melissa was with me in the 3rd week. I finally had some luck. By then, I had gotten better at asking questions and showing photos, approaching people with calm confidence. On a Friday, at a cafe and bar, a female server took a second look at Melissa's photo and recognized her, though she hesitated at first. After some gentle persuasion and a little cash, she opened up. She didn't recognize the men in my photos, but mentioned another man she'd seen with Melissa gray beard glasses, neatly cut salt and pepper hair, though I didn't recognize the description. She confirmed they had been seen together multiple times. Leaving the cafe, I felt elated, finally having a solid lead that day. My mood was so good the coworkers noticed, and I even closed a tough deal at work, earning praise and a bonus from my boss. Despite my situation, I felt surprisingly positive. Using the server's description, I created a composite sketch of the man. The result looked like someone who belonged in a university, but I couldn't match him to anyone online. A few weeks later, I had almost given up. I brought the sketch to work to continue searching. During lunch one day, a co-worker, Arturo Mendoza, stopped by and noticed the drawing on my desk. To my surprise, he recognized the man, saying he was a regular donor to a charity our company supported. Though Arturo couldn't recall the name right away, he eventually remembered Conrad Miller. I was thrilled. Sometimes it's the little things that make a big difference. And getting this name felt like a major breakthrough. I considered investigating at work, but Arturo's behavior made me think it was better to do it at home. Oddly enough, my house had become my home again. Despite the pain and memories of Melissa that evening, I quickly found out about Conrad Miller. Yes, he had a younger wife and 2 kids, but there was no mention of any long trips abroad. In fact, he seemed to be a homebody. His wife, Diane Lindgren, kept a low profile, which isn't easy when you're married to a billionaire. The internet was full of information on Conrad, who was a DOT billionaire from the 1990s. He had diversified his wealth, investing in everything from airlines to weapons research. I finally understood what Melissa had meant in her warning, but why would a guy like that, who could have any woman, be interested in my wife? It didn't make sense. Diane was beautiful, and while Melissa was attractive, she wasn't in the same league. My initial excitement faded, leaving me confused and lost. What was I supposed to do now? I had been thinking about a millionaire, but a billionaire that was a whole different world, with tight security around them. 2:47. Reaching out to Conrad's wife no longer seemed feasible. I couldn't help but wonder what Melissa had dragged us into. I went to bed feeling more dejected than ever. The rest of the week felt the same, uncertain and apprehensive. It was as if my subconscious was trying to keep me from discovering the truth. The internet may be full of lies, but it's useful. When digging up information, I quickly found more details about Conrad and Diane online. Conrad was wealthy, but looked more like a bookish professor. Diane was stunning, making it even harder to understand why Conrad would be involved with my wife. But despite all this, I was no closer to understanding anything. I spent weeks researching Conrad Miller's business interests. While I'm no financial analyst, it was clear. His businesses were diverse. 1/3 of them were publicly traded and easy to research, but the rest were privately held and difficult to investigate. As for my day trading, I initially set aside $10,000, but quickly lost most of it. After investing another $20,000, I finally started to see small profits. By the time I had blown through almost $40,000, I began making more significant gains. 6 months after Melissa left, I decided to quit my job to focus on day trading and finding my wife. Despite attempts by my boss and coworkers to change my mind, I told them I no longer wanted to work with Melissa gone. I had nearly $2 million in assets, with day trading accounting for 40%. The rest came from savings and equity in my mortgage-free house. I also had $400,000 and a 401k I could tap if needed. Realizing Melissa's lover was a billionaire, not a millionaire, made my chances of getting close to him slim. I shifted my focus to learning more about his wife, Diane. Unfortunately, there wasn't much information, as she led a reclusive life. There were rumors of estrangement, which wasn't surprising. I did find out that Conrad had a large estate in Tuxedo, New York, where his wife and children lived, but he rarely spent time there. I learned all this around the time I quit my job. Now nothing was tying me down. All I needed was my laptop, a few clothes, my camera, and a full tank of gas. My daughters, Katie and Carla were my only concern. But Katie was married and living out of state, and Carla was finishing college and planning to start her master's degree. They were both pillars of strength for me, and I stayed in constant contact with them. Carla and Katie took their mother's abandonment hard, especially Carla, who was very close to her. At first, Carla blamed me for Melissa's departure. But as weeks passed without hearing from her mother, Carla's anger shifted. When Carla would angrily declare that her mother was dead to her, I didn't stop her in a twisted way. It felt good that Melissa had lost at least one of her daughters. Eventually, Katie also began venting about her mother. By the time I tried to curb the negative talk, it was too late. I understood their pain. They felt as betrayed as I did. I apologize if this story seems disjointed, but my thoughts were all over the place. Divorce is like experiencing a pass away, and I was going through the stages of grief. I started with denial, not believing Melissa was really gone. Then came anger and bargaining, where I'd pray at night, promising to attend church if Melissa came back. Depression set in by the third week, and lingered acceptance still eluded me. I figured it would only come after a face-to-face meeting with Melissa at the start of the 7th month. Several things jolted me back into action. First, my attorney called asking what I wanted to do about the divorce. I hadn't heard from him in months and assumed the divorce was finalized since I hadn't signed anything. I was shocked to learn it wasn't. That was odd. The next day, Carla and Katie both called, saying they had heard from their mother. Carla was a mess, and it took 10 minutes to calm her down. As soon as she realized it was her mom on the line, she unleashed her anger, telling Melissa she was dead to her and that she didn't want her at her graduation or wedding. Carla even said Melissa would never see her future grandchildren. Melissa reportedly sobbed uncontrollably before the call disconnected. Katie's conversation with Melissa was more civil, at least at first. Katie tried to find out where her mother had been, but Melissa refused to share details. Since I had been open with my daughters about Conrad Miller, Katie tried to get more information by revealing that she knew about Melissa's relationship with him. Melissa gasped and tried to deny it, but Katie had lost patience. By then, she told her mother off, saying Melissa had ripped out their father's heart and abandoned her daughters for her lover. Melissa broke down, repeating that she was sorry and still loved them. Before the call ended around a.m. the next morning, my phone rang, jolting me awake. My heart raced, fearing something had happened to my daughters. After a few tries, I answered, "Hello, Mark. I'm so sorry, my 2 girls hate me." I was pretty sure it was Melissa, but I asked, "Who is this?" The line went dead. I traced the number and called back, but no one answered. Later that day, when I tried again, the number was out of service. However, I found out the call came from Tuxedo, New York. It seemed Melissa was back in the U.S. and living with her lover. But that didn't make sense. Conrad's estate in Tuxedo was supposed to be for his wife and children. Maybe they were away, or perhaps Conrad was visiting them now that he was back in the country. About a month ago, I learned that Diane Lindgren lived on the estate with her children. So I tried to contact her by phone, but that went nowhere. I was politely informed that she didn't take calls from strangers. Realizing I was dealing with the ultra-wealthy, I knew I needed a different approach. The next day, I made some grades and netted $227,000. That night around, I went grocery shopping, and as I was returning to my car, a man grabbed me from behind and whispered, "You need to stop bothering Mr. Miller." My pent-up anger exploded. Using my self-defense training, I twisted free, kicked him in the knee, and twisted his wrist behind his back. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, holding him in a position where I could easily break his arm. The man, likely in his 30s and in good shape, was clearly not a random thug. He had a professional vibe about him. "You're making a big mistake," he said through clenched teeth. Just then, I felt a weapon pressed against my head. "Let him go," a voice commanded. I kept my hold and turned to negotiation tactics. "We at a standoff," I said quietly. "You can shoot me, but I'll still break your friend's arm. People will hear the fire shot and they might catch you before you escape. Besides, I have a hidden microphone on me. Everything we're saying is being recorded, and if you shoot, it'll tie Conrad Miller to a liquidation." After a pause, the man with the weapon asked, "What do you propose?" "Take 2 steps back and keep your weapon on me," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'll get your friend up, but he'll shield me. Your job was to warn me to stay away from Mr. Miller and message. Received. Then you'll walk away, and when I feel safe, I'll release your friend." The man agreed, saying they were only supposed to warn me, not hurt me. I slowly lifted his friend, who looked enraged and dangerous. "I can still you," I warned him, "but Letton, avoid that." I instructed the other man to start walking away. He did, though he kept looking back when he was about 75 feet away. I released the man I was holding and pushed him toward his friend. But instead of leaving, he turned to me and said, "You've been warned. Stay away from Mr. Miller." I pulled out my 9mm and aimed at his head. "Tell your boss, I don't give a damn about him. If he wants to keep his secrets, he better leave me alone." The man turned pale, clearly not expecting me to be armed. I considered following them, but realized it wouldn't help. Their vehicle wouldn't be traceable to Conrad. I needed to regroup. I had clearly stirred something up, but wasn't sure what. I picked up my groceries and headed home, poured a drink, and tried to calm my nerves. Sitting at the kitchen table, I started listing what I knew to formulate a plan. Conrad Miller was definitely the man Melissa ran off with, but why his wife, Diane, was beautiful and seemed kind? Why would a billionaire choose my wife over her? Maybe Diane wasn't as perfect as she seemed, but the media hadn't hinted at any issues. It finally dawned on me that it was probably my daughter. Katie's mention of Conrad Miller and my call to Diane that had provoked this reaction from the billionaire. At one point, I wondered if Melissa had gone into witness protection, which could explain her sudden departure and leaving everything behind. But if that were true, why wouldn't she have taken the girls after tonight? I dismissed that idea. Those men weren't federal agents. They were too sloppy, and I shouldn't have been able to overpower one of them, even with my martial arts training. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I was that these men worked for Conrad Miller. This led me to 2 big questions. Why did Conrad want to keep me away from Melissa, and why did Melissa leave without discussing it with me? These questions made me think about Melissa before we got together. She was 26 when we married and had worked as a bookkeeper. She lived with her parents, then had her own apartment before we got together. Her parents died in a house fire before we started dating, and most of her mementos were lost. It hit me that I didn't know much about Melissa's life before we met. Then there was her cell phone. She insisted on keeping it separate from mine and the girls, even though it would have been cheaper on a family plan. She also had the bills sent directly to her, and I never saw any of the statements. This arrangement bothered me more. After she left around the time I learned about Conrad Miller and that the divorce hadn't gone through, I came up with the plan to get copies of her cell phone bills. I arranged a meeting with Melissa's divorce lawyer, pretending to discuss the final settlement. I told him I was skeptical and wanted to see all the paperwork first. He agreed, and I reviewed everything on the conference table. I discreetly took photos of the general power of attorney Melissa had given her lawyer, then told him I needed time to think at home. I downloaded the photos and altered the document to make it look like I had the power of attorney. It wouldn't hold up to close scrutiny, but I was confident would work. When I presented it at the cell phone provider store, they asked for Melissa's password. Luckily, I remembered seeing her enter it once. It was a combination of our daughter's birth dates. I used it, and it worked. I learned that Melissa's phone had been canceled shortly after she left, but I also got the last year of statements back home. I analyzed the statements and ruled out most of the calls as routine. But once a month, Melissa had called a number in Nashville, until about 4 months before she left. The calls were always on the same day and at the same time each month. Then, in the months leading up to her departure, the calls increased. And the day before she left, there were 5 calls to this number. The idea that Melissa had been phoning her lover all this time infuriated me. But another thought quickly followed. If the affair started recently, why had she been making 1 call a month for 8 months before it supposedly began? And why were the calls on the same day each month? The sudden increase in calls didn't make sense. I tried calling the number, but it had been disconnected. I had high hopes, but the phone bills turned out to be another dead end. It was so frustrating that I thought about just signing the divorce papers and moving on. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't have any peace without knowing why. After my encounter in the parking lot, I realized the one lead I hadn't fully explored was the estate in Tuxedo, New York. So I packed my car and made the 13-hour drive to New York, though I had only a vague plan, which worried me. I was also concerned about bringing my weapon, knowing New York didn't recognize my concealed carry permit. It's ironic how New York has strict weapon laws, yet one of the highest liquidation rates. When I arrived in Tuxedo, I checked into a motel. I wanted to pay cash, but they insisted on a credit card. We compromised by running my card, but agreeing not to process it unless necessary. I told them I was hiding from my wife until our divorce was final, and they seemed sympathetic. Next, I scouted the estate. It was mad massive, with a high wall surrounding it to keep out prying eyes. The front gate was guarded, though the men were well hidden. With my camera's telephoto lens, I took several pictures of each guard and noticed that one of them was the same man I had taken down in the parking lot. I knew I was in the right place. I just needed a way to get inside, or at least see inside. Then 2 moving trucks arrived, which made me nervous. They might be preparing to leave. But after one of the guards spoke to the drivers, the trucks left, though I was sure they'd be back. I was desperate to get into that house, but I'm no secret agent with special gadgets. I kept brainstorming ways to get inside, but each idea seemed ridiculous. The estate covered an entire block, so I made several slow passes around it, avoiding the front gate by cutting down side streets. On my 3rd pass, I noticed a large tree with a couple of limbs extending slightly over the wall in the northwest corner. It was a crazy idea, but it was all I had. I found a nearby hardware store, bought a collapsible ladder and some rope, and headed back. Once back, I stopped by the tree, making sure no one was around. I unloaded the ladder and rope, hid them in the bushes, and parked my car a block away. In case I needed to make a quick getaway, I returned to the tree, set up the ladder, and climbed into the tree with the rope around my neck. I kicked the ladder over to avoid drawing attention. If I needed to escape, I'd use the rope. Ironically, 7 months ago I wouldn't have been able to pull myself up into that tree, but now, after all my exercise, it was easy. I climbed higher until I had a clear view of the backyard. It was large and beautifully landscaped, with a patio, an expensive grill, outdoor furniture, and a TV. The main feature was a large oval-shaped pool with a waterfall and slide. But what really caught my attention was Diane Lindgren lounging by the pool with a book. She looked even more beautiful in person. Then I saw the sliding glass door open and a man stepped out. He stayed in the shade of the porch for several minutes, so I couldn't see who it was. Finally, he walked over to Diane and kissed her. I was shocked. It was Conrad Miller. This was a mess. He had stolen my wife and was still with his own. Suddenly, there was a commotion inside the house. 2 men with weapons and silencers ordered the couple back inside. I had no idea what was happening, but it was clearly bad. I pulled out my phone and called emergency, telling the operator there had been a shooting. I wasn't sure if there had been, but I figured it would get the police there faster. I'd already tied off the rope and quickly threw it down. It only took me seconds to descend, and then I sprinted toward the house, expecting someone to shoot me at any moment. But no shots were fired. When I reached the sliding glass door, it was still open. I quietly slipped inside and crept toward the voices peeking into a spacious living room. I saw 7 people. 4 were strangers, but I immediately recognized the other 3. My heart sank when I saw Melissa among them. Melissa was sitting on the couch with Diane and her husband. "Please, Gino," Conrad begged, "let the women go. I'm the one who took the money. I can get it back for you and more." "It's not about the money anymore," said a short, heavy-set man with a nasty smile. "It's about honor. You stole from us, and that woman got my brother Johnny sent to prison for 20 years. I was horrified when Gino pointed his weapon at my wife. "Gino, she didn't do it." "I did," Diane said defiantly. "I used her computer to send all the information to the government. She had nothing to do with it, but she cooperated all the information." Gino sneered. "It doesn't matter. She knows too much, and I'm not leaving any loose ends, since you're going to eliminate us anyway." Conrad interrupted. "Can I ask a few questions?" "Why not?" Gino smirked. "I've got a few minutes. I sent one of my men to confirm something." "What is that?" Conrad asked. Gino chuckled. "I was surprised when you and your bookkeeper showed up last night. We've been watching this place for weeks, figuring your wife would lead us to you, but you came back here. There must be something here. You wanted that your wife couldn't get for you." Just then, another man entered the room. "You were right, Gino," he said, smiling. "I found his safe hidden in the floor." "I thought so." Gino's smile widened as he turned to Conrad. "Your mistake was loving your wife too much. You should have trusted her with the combination, but it wouldn't have mattered. We planned to follow her anyway, and she would have led us to you." Conrad sighed, looking sadly at his wife before turning back to Gino. "But why go after Melissa? She was just a bookkeeper. She was your personal bookkeeper. Gino corrected you treated her more like a daughter than an employee. I figured she knew where your money was and how to access it. I also thought she'd know every property you owned, giving us places to search for you. But how did you find out?" "We informed on your brother. Diane asked you were clever in how you fed information to the government. Gino admitted even your husband didn't know you were the informant at first. It took years and a lot of money for our hackers to trace it back to you. I have to hand it to you." Gino chuckled. What do you call yourself now? Conrad Miller? That was smart. You and your wife had plastic surgery and reappeared as a new billionaires. But most of that wealth is a facade, isn't it? It was clever because I knew you hadn't stolen $1 billion. What did you take? 40 or 50 million? 78 million. Conrad corrected that much. Gino nodded. I'm impressed, but you were always the smart one, Jacob. That's why my brother brought you in. You took our legal money and turned it into legitimate businesses. But you got greedy and skimmed too much, hiding it in places we didn't know about. Johnny finally caught on, and he was about to eliminate you when your wife ratted him out to the feds. It threw me off for a long time, but I eventually found your bookkeeper. I planned to grab her and her family, torturing and liquidating them one by one until she gave you up. But then she disappeared without a trace. That's when I knew there was a mole in my organization. It didn't take long to figure out. It was Kelly, and we eliminated her. Kelly's dead. Conrad asked, shocked and saddened. Yes, but I didn't eliminate her. She jumped from a second-story window trying to escape. Unfortunately, she died on impact, so we didn't get any information from her. After she bolted, it didn't make sense to grab her family without knowing where she was. So we tapped their phones. It took months, but that's how we discovered your real name in this location. If you knew we were here, why didn't you take us last night? Conrad asked. Gino shook his head. I outsmarted myself while watching this house. I figured you'd need new IDs, so I blocked them from being delivered. My plan was to replace the moving van drivers with my men. But when you didn't get the new IDs, you sent the vans away. That's when I decided to strike. Now, here we are, enough talk you. Can make this easy or hard. I need the combination to the safe. If you don't give it to me, I'll eliminate your bookkeeper first, then your wife, and finally you. Worst case, I'll just cut open the safe. As I stood just out of sight, everything clicked. I had one option, Gino. I used to think your brother was the lowest prick. Conrad snarled, but you've proved me wrong. I'll take that as a compliment. Gino laughed. But don't worry, I'll pass your regards to Johnny. Now, let's finish this months of anger. Depression and hopelessness faded away. I was still scared, but I knew I had to act. I quickly reviewed all my firearms training, checked my Ruger's safety, and aimed at Gino. My instruct had taught me to eliminate the most immediate threat first. I knew I had only seconds to make each shot count. I took a small breath and squeezed the trigger. I knocked Gino in the back, and he fell forward. I then shot the man aiming at Melissa, taking him down. I fired again, striking a third man before they started shooting back. A bullet shot my left side, but I kept shooting. The fourth and fifth men went down, but I was shot again, feeling a bullet slam into my left shoulder. Blood was running down my face, likely from a graze on my forehead. I stood there staring at Melissa, unable to speak. Her eyes widened, and she started toward me. I remember hearing the wail of police cars before everything went dark. When I woke up, I knew I was in a hospital and remembered everything. It was dark, and the room was filled with medical equipment. I noticed I was handcuffed to the bed in pain. I pressed the button for a nurse. To my surprise, Melissa entered the room with a policeman. "Mark," she said in a panicked voice, "are you all right?" "I just hurt," I replied weakly. I was hoping someone could give me something for the pain. A nurse arrived moments later with a syringe and administered the pain medication. The pain began to ease. Melissa moved to my side, and the policeman stood at the foot of my bed. "Oh, Mark," Melissa cried, I'm so sorry for putting you through all this. I didn't know what else to do. I knew what Johnny and Gino were capable of and was terrified of what they'd do to you and the girls. I wanted to protect all of you. Conrad convinced me that the only way to keep you safe was to make you believe I'd found a lover and divorce you. I almost crumbled when I saw the hurt in your eyes. Melissa sobbed harder. I reached out and took her hand. You did it to protect us, and yes, it hurt a lot. I spent months trying to understand why you abandoned us. I needed to know why, and I'm sorry. I think I led Gino and his men to you and Conrad. No, it wasn't your fault, Mark. Melissa choked out between sobs. It's all my fault. I was so lonely and missed my family so much that I called each of you, even though Conrad warned me not to. When I found out how much the girls hated me, I wanted to die. But I couldn't tell you where I was or what was happening. Conrad was working desperately to get us new identities and find a new hiding place. The moving trucks arrived, but we still didn't have our IDs. I'd resigned myself to getting eliminated, but at least my family would be safe. The pain medication kicked in and I lost track of time. When I woke, the sun was shining. Melissa was asleep in the chair next to my bed, holding my hand. My arm was bandaged and it ached, but my side hurt more still. The pain wasn't too bad, so I tried to pull myself up in bed. If you've ever spent time in a hospital bed, you know how uncomfortable they are. Plus, it's hard to move. When you're handcuffed to the bed, my attempt to sit up startled Melissa, awake alarm in her eyes. What are you doing? She asked, just trying to get comfortable. I replied with a weak smile. She adjusted my position until I was more at ease, then surprised me with a kiss. I never thought I'd feel her lips on mine again. I love you with all my heart, she whispered. Can you ever forgive me, Melissa? It's clear I still love you. I said I thought about signing the divorce papers, but after 22 years of marriage, I couldn't do it without knowing why. I suspected you might have taken a lover, but it never made sense. I couldn't give up until I was sure you didn't love me anymore. Oh God, what did I ever do to deserve you? She said, crying again. After she calmed down, I told her to take the key to my motel room and get some rest. She looked exhausted, so I insisted. Convincing the policeman on duty to let her have my motel key was another challenge, but a call to his superiors finally did the trick. I then learned the district attorney was debating whether to charge me for having an illegal weapon. Ridiculous, considering I'd just helped take down a major crime organization. And they were worried about a concealed carry permit. After Melissa left, I asked the nurse to get my cell phone, but the police had taken it. They eventually let me use the hospital phone, and I called both my daughters, Katie and Carla, and told them the whole story, leaving out the fact that I was in the hospital until the end. They were upset and insisted on coming to see me. Both girls were distraught when they learned what their mother had been through and regretted how they had treated her. I told them not to knock themselves up. I would have said worse if I'd had the chance. 10 hours later, Katie arrived at the hospital after catching a flight to LaGuardia and renting a car. She looked pale as she entered my room, and Melissa had stepped out for coffee. "Oh, Daddy, are you going to be all right?" she asked, hugging me gently. "The Dr. Sayun. Be fine." I assured her they're discharging me tomorrow. By then, the DA decided not to press charges, but we had to agree to be available if they needed us to testify. A few minutes later, Melissa returned. I hadn't told her the girls were coming, afraid she might run away again after what they'd said to her. When she saw Katie, they stared at each other for a moment, before Katie ran to her mother, and they hugged, crying and apologizing. 4 hours later, Carla arrived, and the scene repeated. Soon all three women were clustered around my bed, fussing over me. Finally, the nurse got me up to walk around, and my wife and daughters refused to leave my side. Tears filled my eyes. It took over 6 months, but my marriage had gone from the brink of ruin to being stronger and more loving than ever. In the weeks after the shootout, I learned that Gino and 2 of his men died at the scene. The other 2 survived surgery and now face liquidation and hijack charges, likely spending the rest of their lives in prison. Gino's brother, Johnny, was also indicted for liquidation, and all 3 of Conrad's guards died. Thankfully, my name and Melissa's were not released to the media, though the FBI assured me the criminal organization was destroyed. I insisted on having our names redacted and obtained a court order to seal the records. Conrad and Diane turned state's evidence, exposing parts of the criminal network the feds hadn't uncovered. They were sentenced to community service contingent on turning over their illegally gained wealth, much of it in bitcoins locked in the safe. They must have had valuable information to get such a light sentence. I also learned that their 2 children were staying with a nanny in Florida. After finishing their community service, Conrad and Diane left the U.S., likely not surrendering all the money. A year later, we received a postcard from Spain that simply said, "We're sorry for everything." Thank you. Having Melissa back home took some adjustment. I still felt some resentment for her leaving, even though I understood why she did it. Meanwhile, Melissa struggled with night terrors. Waking up screaming, counseling really helped us. Coming home was a shock for Melissa. The house had changed a lot while she was gone. I'd taken care of all the repairs, repainted and completely redone our bedroom. Melissa also had to adjust to my new work life. I no longer wanted a traditional job and now work from home, making day trades, which lets us take spontaneous vacations together, something she loves. She was impressed by how fit I'd become and started going to the gym with me, although she wasn't interested in karate. Now we go to the gym 3 times a week, and I practice karate twice a week. Our Zed life reignited with a new intensity as we both realized we couldn't take anything for granted. Carla is getting married in 3 months, and Melissa is deeply involved in the wedding planning. Katie is pregnant with a boy, and both girls call us almost daily. Carla even moved in for a few weeks after I got home to help, but I was relieved when she went back to her apartment. I didn't need another wife. Melissa and I still worry about each other a lot. When we started sleeping together again, I'd wake up when she reached out to make sure I was still there, and I'd do the same. At the start of all this, I was desperate to understand why she had left me.